Welcome to Unleash Your Inspired Voice, the podcast that focuses on developing a more conscious-minded, heart-centered approach to life and business. And now here to introduce today's special guest is the host of Unleash Your Inspired Voice, author, content strategist, and Unity Consciousness activist, Peter Clark Nelson.
Hey, what's going on, beautiful souls? My name is Peter Clark Nelson, the host for Unleash Your Inspired Voice. Our guest for today's show is Debra Crosby. During this episode, Debra and I discuss how to tell brilliant stories that ignite the imagination and warm the soul of your audience. Whether you do videos on Facebook, deliver public presentations, facilitate group programs and retreats, or have a dream of being on the TED Talk stage, this is a can't miss episode. Debra Crosby is an author, principal of the Present to Prosper studio, and originator of the TED Talk Blueprint for Success Speeches training program. Coming from a lineage of storytellers in her family, she has dedicated her life to the soul of the oral tradition. Debra is passionate about working with speakers who deliver messages, solutions, and ideas that have the potential to unite us as one global tribe. Through her sacred work, Debra turns entrepreneurs into sought-after speakers who own the stage by teaching them how to communicate in a warm, confident, compelling, clear, and concise manner. As principal of the Present to Prosper studio and the originator of the TED Talk Blueprint for Success Speeches training program, Debra brings over 10,000 hours of expertise to her practice, with more than 30 years of skill as a professional presenter, trainer, and producer. This work also includes serving as a television host to a home audience of 2.5 million people. She was also nominated for the Best Acting and Media Coach in the United States by the National Digital Film Academy. In this exciting and highly engaging episode, Debra will bring aspects of the mystical transformative energies of Africa into our discussion as she personally studied at the feet of the elders, wise ones, and shamans while she lived with 2 tribes in Africa, one in Kenya, East Africa, and the other in Senegal, West Africa. To help you improve your skills as a presenter, Debra will bring into focus different tools from several traditions, including acting, storytelling, improv, the creative arts, healing arts, art therapy, and of course, African wisdom. Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Peter Clark Nelson, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. This is the show that teaches you how to joyously scale your consciousness while profitably scaling your business. And I'm incredibly excited and honored to have as my guest today, Debra Crosby, who is the founder of Present to Prosper Studio and is also known as the blue-haired goddess of unconditional friendliness. So I want to welcome you, Debra, to the show. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
It's, as I said, it's an honor. And just knowing your background, it was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on here. You have logged in over 10,000 hours of presentations, trainings, and producing over a 30-year illustrious career. And your background is really incredible. So for those who are tuning into this show, you are in for a real treat. And if you have an inspired message, which most of the people who watch this show and listen to it absolutely do, you may be wanting to improve the way that you tell stories and becoming an unforgettable presenter. And that's going to be the focus for today's episode. So Debra, take us through a little bit of your journey and how you got to this particular point and what your focus is with Present to Prosper Studio.
Okay, I'm going to start with the story. The real story, which usually blows people away, is in 5th grade, Sister John Joseph asked me to come to her desk. This was the 3rd week in September, and she said, "You need to take this letter home to your mother." I just nodded and agreed, and I took the letter home. My mother read the letter, and as it turns out, the letter said, "We need to get Debra tested. I'm concerned that she might be mute." In other words, I never spoke. She thought I couldn't speak. And my mother was appalled at this letter because at home, in fact, on the summer and on weekends, I was writing plays and putting on full-blown productions on my back porch with all the neighborhood kids. So clearly I could speak and I could communicate because I was directing these plays. I was just introverted and shy in the school system. It had been my third time changing schools. And it was also an awkward time for girls. I just was sort of in my shell. So my mother wrote back and said, Debra can talk, and she's quite verbal and she can communicate, and she loves writing stories and telling stories. So sister asked me to come up to her desk during a break, and she said, I want you to go down to the library and pick out 5 kindergarten books. And so I did, and I brought them back, and she said, tomorrow during our free break, you're going to go down to the kindergarten and you're going to read one of these books to the kindergartners. And I was like, ah! So I had to go down, and lo and behold, there's like little 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds sitting on my lap, and they're just loving on me. And I got into what I was doing because it didn't feel like there was any threat, because they were just kids, and what little kid doesn't love stories? And so I got into the characters, and I got into sound effects, and I got into voices, and the kids loved it. I didn't want to leave, actually. I kind of discovered like this was really fun. So at the end of the half-hour break, I had to go back up to 5th grade, and that teacher had enough wherewithal to make sure once a week on Thursdays, I went down to the library and picked out children's books, and once a week on Friday, I went to the kindergarten and I read books out loud to the kindergartners. And that really helped me break out of my shell. It gave me confidence in terms of that I had some kind of gift to share, and the little kids absolutely loved whatever I did, and I didn't have to be perfect. They just loved hearing stories, and they loved acting out the stories, and it was entertaining and amusing for them, but it was also entertaining and amusing for me, and that was really the beginning of my journey. Most people, when they meet me, they think that I'm naturally outgoing, I'm naturally confident, and honestly, it's been a journey. It's been a work in progress. I'm still a work in progress. I'm not done. And I'm always open to learning, and I'm definitely open to transformative work. And so here I am. This has been a lifelong journey to tell stories. Here I am today.
That's it. Well, that's an incredible start. I mean, and to credit to the sister to recognize the opportunity to really allow you to create and to be able to hone a skill that obviously your mother was able to convey to her, that, here you are, this very talkative and very, expressive, young girl. And yet, obviously at school, you may have been quiet. And I think that's part of the thing for a lot of individuals that are naturally introverts. I'm naturally an introvert, and yet the work that I do calls on me to be the complete opposite of that. And so I can very much relate to that particular journey of being relatively quiet and then coming upon a point in my career where it was time for me to begin speaking publicly. And I think that's one of the things too about unleashing one's inspired voice. It's an interesting journey that truly never ends. There's always moments where you can look at your career and you say, okay, I spoke to this many people, or I've been on radio, I've been on television, whatever it might be for some, and yet there's still room to grow. There's still levels to unleash your inspired voice. And so your journey, and all of the different things you've been on television, you have been teaching for most of your life, and you've created a groundbreaking TED Talk curriculum, which for anybody who's a subject matter expert and is aware of TED Talk, how important that is to be able to get on one of the TED Talk programs and share your message. So I definitely want to jump into that at some point in this conversation. If you can take us through a little bit of your journey with respect to the work you've done both on television and also in theater and in the entertainment industry, because I feel like that's where you started to really develop your skill sets for teaching. But there's also a journey that you had to Kenya, where you were introduced to how important storytelling is for creating unity. And I think that is really a foundation that I find incredibly fascinating, and it's very dear to my heart with respect to using our voice and using our storytelling skills to establish a unified connection across cultures, across gender, and you've certainly been able to do that. So share a little bit about these different areas of your experience and how that's brought you to this point.
Oh my gosh. So where do I begin? There's so many hooks. As I say, in terms of conversations, you're throwing a lot of great hooks out there. I'm just going to go with this one to start with. Later on in that year, in geography, we learned about this continent called Africa. And at 10, I decided I was going to go. Didn't have any clue why, just was going to go. And I came home from school that day. I said, Mom, I'm going to Africa. She was doing dishes in the kitchen sink. And she said, okay, go away. Because she didn't say no, that meant yes. And I became the president of the French club a couple of years later. And I proposed to the French club that we go to Paris. So I'm 12. Okay. And I had a secret idea that myself and Jenny McDonough would row our boats over the Mediterranean at night from Paris and get to Morocco, have fun in Morocco, and just row the boat back early in the morning. Nobody would have known.
Right. That sounds like a movie. That's a movie pitch right there.
So I was determined to get to Paris with a secret desire of actually getting to Africa, because there was this real strong pull that I felt compelled that I had to go. Anyway, Ms. Julia said, okay, Debra, you're going to have to sell a lot of candy bars if you want to get to Paris. And I'm like, okay, sign me up. My mother was a school teacher and a kindergarten teacher and a school bus driver for a kindergarten in the town that I grew up in. And she had been a kindergarten teacher and a school bus driver for this kindergarten for quite some time, a good old decade. And so she had lists and lists of previous students. And I called her up from the principal's office at school and I said, Mom, you have to pick me up in the van. She had a long, 15-seater van. That was her bus. Because I have to sell candy bars because I'm going to Paris. My mother said, okay, to her credit. So I pick up 10 boxes that had 10 cases that had 10 candy bars in each case. And we drove all over the city, and I would go up to the door and I would say, that's my mom, and they would know who she was. And I'm raising money because I want to get to Paris. Would you be willing to buy a candy bar? And everybody not only bought a candy bar, but they usually bought a case. It's like, what kind of kid has this kind of motivation? So I go back to school on Friday and I had a wad of cash, obviously. And I'm like, we are going to Paris. I'm going to get to Morocco, roll my boat with Jenny McDonough overnight. And Miss Julia said, well, we got great news. We've decided we're going to go to Montreal. And Debra has raised enough money to not only pay for her trip to Montreal, but to defray the cost of 3 other individuals who otherwise wouldn't have been able to go. Now, you think as a kid, I would have been disappointed that we weren't making it to Paris so I could have my secret adventure to Morocco. I actually felt really happy that I was helping other people get someplace exciting and cool. I did, however, look at the map, and I clearly had figured out that there's no way we're rowing our boat from Canada to Mediterranean to get to Morocco while we're in that trip. But I was on a mission literally since 10 years old to get there. And in college, I was invited to go to Kenya. And when I was invited, I went, are you serious? And the person I was dating at the time was, oh, I'm serious, let's go. And I raised the money and spent the entire summer living with a tribe in a mud hut on Razinga Island, which is on Lake Victoria, with the Loue Tribe. No running water, no electricity, no television, no plumbing, no toilet, no radio, no modern conveniences, definitely no Starbucks. And I was in heaven. I was absolutely in heaven. I had a wonderful, wonderful experience. It was life-changing for me in terms of really living an incredibly simple, basic life where people are valued, appreciated, and respected, and there's a sense of community, like tribe. I got to live with tribe and what tribe really means. And everyone is seen and everyone is heard. And everyone, there is a sense of self-worth that shines from people's eyes that you don't actually see in the Western world. And on many occasions at nighttime around the fire, I sat at the feet of the wise ones and listened to story. And they had to be translated from Loue, the tribal language, into English, but I still got how powerful they were, transporting me into my own imagination, into this world, this instruction actually on how to live life and how to deal with challenges and how to deal with difficulties and how to deal with relationships and how to solve problems. And I was in heaven. I was in heaven. And I did say to myself, when I go back to the United States, there's two things I'm coming back with, is this sense of inclusiveness, where everybody in the tribe was involved and included, literally from children to adults to elders. Everyone was valued. Everyone was important. And everybody was friendly. And I also took this most ancient art form that I still love and adore to this day, and that's the power of storytelling. And I'm just deeply grateful that I had that experience, and I do carry that with me wherever I go, wherever I teach. I'm still sitting at the feet of the elders, and I'm getting to carry that legacy forward with what I do. And I know it's important work, because stories, as Clarissa Pencoli-Essie said, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, stories are maps for the soul. And that's something that's missing in a lot of modern day world, is having maps for the soul. I got to have that experience. And that's sort of at a very primal level, that is something that I do bring into my work.
Well, first of all, I want to just commend you for your creative tenacity to manifest what your heart's desire is, because that's an often unspoken area of our creative gift, is to be able to listen to hear what our heart is sharing with us, and then to follow it, irregardless of what might show up. Like, for example, you wanted to go to Paris, you wanted to go to Morocco, you wanted to have this incredible adventure, and that passion carried you and other people to Canada. And instead of looking at it from a context of, well, I failed because I'm not in Paris, or I'm not going on this amazing adventure, you were able to still make the most of it, and you did not give up, and eventually created the pathway which took you to the feet of the elders, who were instilling in you the very essence of what has allowed humanity to exist. When you look across the span of time and we see just how violent humanity has been, it's oftentimes, amazing that we're still here. And what has allowed us to be here, and what has allowed us to be in the age of Aquarius, to be in an age where it is now being honored to be a heart-centered human being, it's the fact that elders of all the different cultures and tribes have been able to pass down the power of storytelling, to be able to include all genders and ages. As you said, the inclusiveness, the sense of just awareness and love, it's palpable in those particular situations. And yet those are situations where people appear not to have what, the Western world has. So I really commend you for not only allowing yourself to get to that space, but to bring that back and to infuse that level of frequency and vibration into this sacred work you're now doing, and working with heart-centered entrepreneurs and subject matter experts on how to be effective storytellers and presenters. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you come back from Africa, your journey begins with your career, and you find yourself working in the entertainment industry for a while, being on television, and then of course working in theater. How did that prepare you to embark on your own entrepreneurial journey where you're now creating curriculum for TED Talks and you're helping thousands of people around the world get their inspired message seen and heard?
There was a moment when I came back from Kenya and I received this postcard called the League for New England League for Advancement of New England Storytellers. And I went to my grandmother, who was a storyteller to church ladies on Sunday. So I grew up hearing somebody tell stories on a regular basis. And I had a great grandmother who also told stories as a way to those teachable moments. She always did it through story. So I had two really magnificent matriarchs in my family who happened to be on the either side of my family, mother's side, my father's side, who had a massive influence on my upbringing in terms of story and how powerful story is. So I had come back from Kenya having this profound experience, and I called my grandmother up and I said, Gram, there's this conference of this thing that we do every day. Like, I was used to telling stories with my grandmother over tea or over the phone on a daily basis. And she said, we should go. Now, she was 78 at the time, and I'm in my 20s. And we went to this weekend workshop, literally Friday, Saturday, Sunday, with 1.5 hour to 2 hour trainings scheduled out throughout the entire weekend. Went to the very first workshop on that Friday with my grandmother, produced a story, full blown, presented it to the workshop participants, was well received, walked out of that workshop, and I looked at my grandmother and I said, Gram, this is what I'm going to dedicate my life to. Mm-hmm. And my grandmother said, this is what you should dedicate your life to. This is who you are. And I have never wavered from that path. Everything I have done has been about story. Now, I was in the acting world. What is acting? Acting is storyteller's is grandmother, cousin, it's all related, right? Story is theater. Theater is story. And then I went on to, I had a gift for teaching and was invited to teach for one of the major theater companies here in the greater Boston area, and was one of their top artist educators for over a decade, and trained school teachers how to incorporate storytelling, public speaking, acting, improvisation, and creative writing into their curriculum, how to make learning fun through the creative process. And so I became a teacher's teacher. Through that process of working for the Wang Center for the Performing Arts, I was nominated Best Acting Coach and Media Coach in the US by the National Digital Film Academy. It's the same academy that gives out the Oscars, by the way. And when I received the nomination, I thought it was a joke. I didn't think it was real. I was like, because I was so dedicated to my work, I never did it for accolades. It was just, what? Oh, okay, I guess I'm good at this. Then I did theater acting for a long time on stage with full ensemble, helped get a theater company off the ground, taught for that theater company for 10 years as well, as in addition to teaching for this major theater house called the Wang Center in Boston. And I thought, it might be fun to get on television. So I had done theater, I had done a whole bunch of one-woman shows, and now I wanted the next adventure. And for me, it was about having a more powerful impact on the world. And I saw television to be that venue. So I got trained by an acting coach to transition from stage work to camera work. Acting is acting, but the way you express yourself on the stage is different than the way you express yourself on camera. And I intuitively knew that, but I didn't know exactly how to turn the switch on or off. And at the end of that year of training with her, she invited me to teach at her studio, which I did for a year, and then she ended up going off into corporate trading. And then I ended up opening my own acting studio and started teaching acting. Now I'm not going to go into my credentials, certifications, and training that I have to get to that point. I have a lot. A ton. sometimes I look at my resume as, how did one human being do all that training? I have no clue. So I opened my own acting studio, and within a year, I really had this longing to be on television and to give an opportunity to my students from my studio to showcase their talent. And I'm a practical person, and I didn't want to do theater anymore because theater is like 7 days a week and it goes way into the wee hours of the night. I'm like, I just want to do one shot, get my students on television, and that's it. Started a local cable access station with always the objective to get onto broadcast commercial television. And I did everything to make sure not only myself as a messenger was broadcast television, but also the quality of the final product in terms of what we were producing in the local cable access station was worthy to get onto broadcast television. And we did make that leap. And Peter, and local cable access stations exist pretty much everywhere in the United States. I'm sure you have someone in your area.
Yeah.
And only 1% of that population actually makes that leap from local cable access to broadcast television. And that had to do with me opening myself up to listening to anyone in the industry, talking to anyone in the industry, communicating with anyone in the industry, and listening to everyone's stories in terms of, like, what did I need to learn to make that happen? And I was completely willing to do that. And I did end up on broadcast television. We produced a television show out of the Hard Rock Cafe in Boston to a home audience of 2.5 million.
Wow.
And I had amazing talent cross my stage. It was like a New England version of America's Got Talent. Ended up sending many of the winners off to major national television shows like America's Got Talent and The Voice. That was wonderful, incredibly rewarding. But one of the things I didn't realize when I was involved with television production is that it is exhilarating and you are operating on adrenaline all of the time. And the people I met, I am to this day deeply grateful for who graced my stage and the amazing people I met. But it is an industry that is known for chronic stress behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And it did take a toll on my health. And in 2012, I said, that's it, I'm done. And in 2012, I'm in the position where I'm at ground zero. I got to reinvent myself. And it was clear to me, I made that commitment in my early 20s that storytelling is my calling. How do I do that with my gifts, my talents, my credentials, my certifications, and my expertise? How do I do that? How do I reinvent myself? And so literally in my kitchen on a spring day, the sun is streaming in through the window, I'm having a cup of tea, and I'm reflecting on, well, what's the next adventure for Debra? How am I going to be of service to humanity, have a positive impact on people's lives, but also that Debra is living a healthy, well-rounded life, an integrated life in all areas of her life. Not just like television is 7 days a week, a short day is 10 hours. It's just, it's intense. So I wanted to have a more balanced life. And here I am thinking about it, take my sip of tea. My phone was on the kitchen table. And what came across my Facebook feed was John Akers' TED Talk, The Advantage of Happiness. Peter, I listened and watched that 6 times. I was, what is this? What is this? And I became curious and I started watching TED Talks on a daily basis. And I started to read whatever I could read in terms of publications, in terms of TED Talks and what makes a great TED Talks and what's the ins and outs of getting on TED and what are TED curators looking for. And I spent 5 years with my nose to the grindstone researching everything to TED. I fell in love with TED. I had a massive crush on this TED, not the teddy bear, the talks. And I created a curriculum called the TED Talk Blueprint for Successful Speeches training program. And I designed that so anyone who wants to speak and communicate in a clear, concise, and compelling manner can do that, whether or not they want to get on the TED stage. Now, I know how to get people on the TED stage, but I think it's valuable to understand that the TED Talk website has a commandments, 10 commandments, the TED 10 commandments, and I've actually designed the TED Talk training around targeting those 10 commandments. That goes back to my training days when I worked for the Wang Center. You got to make education entertaining and interesting, but you got to have objectives. And what I love about TED is that you only have 18 minutes to convey your message. There is no room for extraneous information. You have to get to the heart and soul of what you're saying. And one of the TED 10 commandments says, "Thou shalt tell a story." What makes my heart sing is story and teaching people story. There are other TED 10 commandments that the other 9 are equally important, but this one really speaks to me. And a brilliant TED Talk inspires the audience to think about themselves, their life, their relationships in the world in a new, fresh way. And a really powerful TED Talk inspires the audience to take action. And I love that because I know why I'm here, Peter. I know I am here to have a positive impact on people's lives. And for me, I've identified the TED stage and TED speakers as the vehicle for me to have that positive and powerful impact. Because I know just the live audience alone, a TED speaker has, usually about 100 people in that live audience. And then it gets filmed and it's put up on YouTube. I mean, jeepers, if you do a great job, millions of hits, millions of people. Now it's just so common language for us to be mentioning vulnerability. Brene Brown's TED Talk. Right. It's now it's in our common language to talk about happiness as something that's important to your well-being. Sean Aker, there's tons of talks about that. I love everything about TED, so I created this whole entire program, literally from an idea, a concept, to going from writing the script to the screen, the whole process. And making sure that there's a powerful PowerPoint, you're doing your research, you've got quantifiable anecdotes, statistics, and facts, but you've mixed it in nicely with metaphor and anecdotes, so it doesn't feel like a lecture. And that's the other thing that I love about TED Talks is what makes it possible to be vulnerable is story. That's the golden nugget. And if you're really in your heart and you're really telling a great story and you've got the subjective, which is your story, you've got that combined with the objective, which is your research, you can really impact somebody's thinking process, how they think, and then how they behave. So cool.
It's very cool. And I'm just, again, blown away by the transitional points that that your journey has taken. And then, like any great story, there's a through line. So there's a theme. And the through line, obviously, for you is this heart-centered guidance to impact the world positively. And when you were listening to your own heart and saying, okay, it's not conducive for me to be in the television industry anymore, as you said, it's all on adrenaline, it's stressful. And when you add stress to adrenaline, that's a potent combination of, something's bound to happen physically if you don't, balance. And there's very little balance in the television industry, as you know. So for you to recognize the opportunity to delve into the TED Talks, there's 2 things that jumped out at me. And I want to jump into this here as it relates to people learning to become a more effective storyteller and to really be an effective presenter. Because like you were saying, your TED Talk curriculum, while it is obviously built around the 10 commandments of the TED Talks, if somebody's taking that curriculum and working with you, even if they never deliver an actual TED Talk, they will become an exponentially more effective and inspiring and passionate speaker.
Absolutely.
So to me, when for somebody who has spoken in public as much as I have, and what you do, the two things that really stand out to me are education and practice.
Yes.
So we all can become inspired. And oftentimes that inspiration leads a lot of people to just go, all right, I'm jumping right into something. You know, I could be on a TED Talk. And maybe they can, and maybe they will. But there is a journey, and that journey requires education, and it requires practicing what you're learning. So talk a little bit about that and how you work with individuals to adhere to this process of not only educating themselves on what they're being called on to present, but why practicing is so critical to delivering impactful presentations.
So we can all be inspired to go on the hero's journey. And if I'm going to speak modern day analogy, if you're the hero, you're Luke Skywalker, I highly recommend getting a Yoda.
Very well said. Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to say I'm the Yoda of TED Talks. I'm the Yoda of communication, and I'm the Yoda of public speaking. Because yes, you can figure it out on your own, but wouldn't you want to be studying with a master, someone who can guide you through that, so you don't fumble and stumble, and actually do it alone? Where I want to be creating a tribe of people where they're supported in a community where they can thrive. And so that's one of the things that's built into my training. I have accountability buddies, and so that they're not alone. And also what's built into my training is there's a soft launch of their TED Talk in a safe environment with a small audience. So they have the opportunity to have it filmed, and they have an opportunity to work out any little kinks. And then that soft launch, when we have that done, that then gets submitted to the TED stage, because it's critical that you have your TED Talk in front of a live audience. Lots of people will submit to TED, but they don't know that their footage that they're submitting has to be in front of a live audience.
Right. So let's go through that journey just a little bit in terms of what involves, from your perspective, and you've obviously had an opportunity to work with individuals who present in a number of different ways, from singing to talking to acting to just giving a presentation to then, of course, having an opportunity to present to potentially millions of people. From your experience, what are some critical steps that a person should be looking at if they want to get their message seen and heard and felt through presentations, even if whether it's on TED or it's perhaps, let's say, for example, somebody just doing videos on social media? What are some tips that you would provide to people?
Yep. My dad, the late Dave Maynard, was a television host and a radio announcer in the greater Boston area for 30 decades. He had a huge following, and he also taught at BU, Boston University, and he taught communication. And I remember asking him, so what's the secret to great, successful public speaking? He said 2 things: know your subject and know your audience. If you know your subject, half the battle's done. But it's really important to know your audience, and what is that audience there to hear. Some people don't actually do their research and figure out who is in their audience. So when I asked my dad that question, I wanted to ace the public speaking class, so I didn't actually have to take it. You could go on day 1, give a speech, and if you targeted all of their objectives, you got the credit, but you didn't have to take the class. That's what I was trying to do. And I gave a talk on wine. And so my dad said, okay, your talk is on wine. What's the average age of the people in your class? And I said, 20s, 30s. He goes, so they're in the dating scene, Debra. So you need to think about how to talk about wine that's going to appeal to their need to maybe impress a date. Bam, I had my platform. I knew exactly what I needed to say to my audience. I was offering them some very intellectual, detailed information about the soil and, how wines get rated and why the bottom of the wine has a dent underneath, so you could, spin the wine around so you could see the label. But I was always making sure they understood that this could be impressive information for a date. And I aced the class, and I didn't have to take it. So based on that one piece of advice that my dad gave. So know your subject and know your audience. So If you're speaking at a conference, really drill down and figure out who is in that audience. And then I go down even a little bit deeper. If there's just one, if you have an audience of 10 or an audience of 100 or an audience of 1,000 or 100,000, who is one person? Your one person who is your ideal audience member, who your whole objective and your whole purpose in life is to only speak to that one. Who are they? Why are they here? What do they need? And what do you want to deliver to them? And as a result of hearing what you have to say, what do you want them to get? I make sure people do that. And that's really helpful because there's more than that one in your audience. But if you're clear, and this is also based on your research, like if you're at a conference, you need to know what is the demographics of your audience and what are they into. A TED audience is different than an SXSW audience. An SXSW audience are young creatives. They're innovatives. A TED Talk audience is an intellectual who's well-read, usually well-educated, and are into new ideas. They're similar, but they're not exactly the same. So you really need to talk to who your audience is. The next thing is less is more. The less you have to say, the more they'll get out of what you have to say. So if you have 20 minutes to speak, design your talk as if you only had 12.
Great point.
Because then you can be relaxed and not rushed. Now, I love Sean Akers' talk on the advantage of happiness. It's brilliant talk, has massive amounts of hits, but he speaks too fast. I love the guy. There is actually research that you want to speak within, I think it's 150 words per minute. And he's over that. He speaks a little bit too fast. You also don't want to speak too slowly. You want to have a nice balance between speeding up and slowing down, which I hope I've role modeled.
Brilliantly, by the way, which is something we'll talk about that in just a second, because you embody everything you talk about.
Thank you. So you want to know your subject, you want to know your audience. Mm-hmm. You want to speak less. So if you have 18 minutes, you want to think about presenting, you only have 8. And also think in 3. So you want to get 3 points across. PowerPoint is something, should be your supporting cast. It shouldn't be distracting. So if you do not know how to use PowerPoint, don't use PowerPoint. If you don't know how to work your stage, like literally the blocking, the physicalization of walking from left to right or front to back, and what that actually means, like when you walk in theater, when you walk backwards, in a sense, it's probably something going back in time. When you're moving forward, you're actually moving into the future. There is meaning to the madness about why an actor moves the way an actor moves. So most people, they don't know how to move. And so out of nervousness, they move. And the analogy I make is your energy, your life force is like a dragon. And if you don't know how to handle the dragon, it could be like you're holding the tail of the dragon and getting whipped around.
Right.
How does one hold the reins of the dragon so you own your power and you're not leaking any energy through fidgety energy or pacing energy? It's better to be calm and still in your body than it is to move. So if you don't know how to move, don't move. Because people, if they're getting transported into their imagination, they're not really looking at you. The same is true for fillers. So when people don't know what to say, it's human nature, knee-jerk reaction to fill it with a filler. It's more powerful not to say anything and wait. So it's more powerful not to move than to move if you don't know how to move. It's more powerful not to say anything if you don't know what to say. That helpful?
Oh, it's incredibly helpful. And for anybody who's watching and listening to this podcast, you already know, and I'm talking to those who are listening and watching this podcast, you already know how important it is for your inspired message to be seen, heard, and felt by the audience that it's designed for. And for those who have followed my work, I'm always using a particular phrase with that, which is aligning your inspired voice, your inspired message with the heart and soul of your audience. And that's exactly what Debra's talking about. And one of the things, Debra, I really just want to acknowledge you for what you were saying. First and foremost, the movement. Because movement is so critical. And as you said, if you're taking an audience on a journey, they're not necessarily paying attention to your movement unless the movement is so out of sync with the flow of the energy that you're creating by the story and by the words that you're saying. So everything needs to be harmonious. It needs to be in sync. And negative energy is not in sync with your key points because that's not what you're there to convey. So it gets picked up by the audience and it can throw them off. The other thing is, and I loved how you said this, you were talking about just going deeper into the nuances of the audience, knowing who you're speaking with. And that's something I talk a lot about with my clients, and I also talk a lot about that in any of the writings and work that I do, which is there is always your general audience. So you have a general audience that you're speaking and communicating your message to. But then there's your primary audience. And then there's your number one ideal client, or the single person, as you beautifully pointed out, that you're communicating to. So there's ways to engage these different levels of your audience. But if you don't take the time to understand who you're truly speaking to and speaking with, and knowing, of course, what your intentions are, then you could deliver some wonderful information and very little of it is going to be remembered and be impactful. And at that point, you've confused activity with accomplishment. So I want to, first of all, thank you again for taking us through this journey, Debra, and for embodying the very essence of what you teach. And that is so important in the world that we're living in today. It used to be maybe people could get away with, teaching things and not really embodying what they're teaching. And that's not the case anymore. We live in a world of transparency, and that's what the Age of Aquarius is really all about. It's about collaboration. It's about inclusion. And this takes me back to what you were saying that you learned from the elders in Kenya when you were there with that tribe. And then so amazingly so that your family, you come from a family of storytellers. You come from a lineage of individuals that understood what it meant to teach and to inspire through the heart. And your stories are so eloquently presented. You include specific details, which takes the listener into the vivid nature of what it is that you're sharing. So they're there with you. And I really would encourage everybody that's watching this episode, or if you're listening to the MP3, be sure to download it and then go back and listen and watch it again. And specifically go back through and pay attention to the way Debra is framing her stories. Listen to the detail that she's using, because you might not have picked it up right away, but I can assure you that when you go back and listen to it again, you're going to see a master storyteller painting the picture in your mind's eye, while at the same time, as you hear the vibration of her words, enter into and align with your heart. So, Debra, first and foremost, again, I want to say thank you for joining us on this episode of Unleash Your Inspired Voice. And I want to turn it back to you and ask you if there's any particular, if you had to take all of your education and your experience with speaking, what would be one of the more important tips that you would suggest to somebody when it comes to being prepared to deliver an effective presentation? And then I'd like for you to share where people can learn more about you and learn more about the TED Talk curriculum that you've created.
3 things is practice. And there's ways that you can practice, do an audio recording, pause. So you would read a sentence from your written script or your written talk, pause, and then say the next line, pause, say the next line in the recording. And what this is going to teach you to do, this is a technique that actors use. And I have several tools and techniques in my tool bag in terms of how I train people to speak in public. Memory skills are usually a big concern for a lot of people. So practice. So this is something you can do an audio recording. So you're going to record the first line of your talk. You're going to pause, and then you're going to record the next line, and so forth and so forth. And what you want to do is that you're filling in where the pause is while you're listening to it. So this is a memorization technique. You can do this in the car. Practice, 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 and practice some more. The next thing you want to do is get yourself with a group of folks who love and adore you, support you, and want to see you do your best work. So once you've practiced, and so for each minute of your talk, you want to put at least, if you're a newbie, put 5 hours per minute in terms of practicing. That's a lot, I know. But the difference will be magnificent. Get a small group of people to do a dress rehearsal, and maybe do 3 dress rehearsals. And the best advice I can give anyone is get yourself a Yoda, get yourself a coach, because you can't see yourself. You can't really coach yourself. You can't see your strengths, and you don't know where your shortcomings are, and you may not know how to turn your shortcomings into stumbling blocks, into building blocks. That's the best advice I can give people. Practice, practice, practice. Get a rehearsal group, and absolutely unequivocally, with every fiber of my being, get a coach. Any area in my life where I have not had the confidence that I want to have, I don't think twice about hiring a professional. And because I put my own feet to the fire, I am constantly in training. And I have a certification in life coaching. I have several certifications in terms of the techniques that I teach. And I actually have a real education in communication from Lesley University. And why I'm laughing is I had a conversation with somebody just last week who went to one coach workshop on public speaking once, and now they've got their shingle out. And that's awesome, you know. I didn't put a shingle out that I was a coach until I had a lot of experience in training and certifications under my belt. But you know, just check out what people are up to. So that's it. That's what I can say is practice and get support. So you're not a solo act. You're not isolated. You're working with a tribe. You're working with a community. There's people who believe in you and support you and have your back. That's the most powerful thing you can do.
I absolutely agree with you. And I think that goes back to just, it's self-love, and people talk about self-love all the time. Not a lot of people correlate self-love to investing in yourself and investing in your business. And I'm really glad that you talked about and so just passionately said that when you are hiring somebody who has real expertise in the field, you know, it's one thing to go take a certification class or to, you know, go read a couple books or whatever, and you go, okay, you know what, I think that I'm a natural at this. And maybe there are people who are naturals at it. However, you can never replace experience. Experience is unique because you can plan, you can strategize, and you can practice. But in the moment, it may not be exactly the way you thought it was going to be. And one of the things that I really respect about you, Debra, is that you have gone through a variety of different environments. You've seen storytelling, you've seen presenting, you've seen the physical movement of storytelling, because oftentimes our physiology, the way we move, is telling the story as effectively, if not more effectively, than the words we use.
I'm going to interject here. So case in point, Ellen DeGeneres has a new stand-up comedy show that's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. That woman is, I bow at her altar. I really, really do. She's so amazing. She has physicalized her act. And make no bones about it, she has choreographed that blocking to the T, and she has rehearsed it to such a degree that it will feel like and seem like to you and I that that was just made up in the moment. Anyone who knows anything about acting and performing, that's all choreographed. And her movement brilliantly and in a gorgeous manner enhances what's you're experiencing in your imagination. She is acting it out. Yeah. I've seen the opposite end of the spectrum. I've seen very funny stand-up comics, but they pace across the stage because they haven't figured out their blocking. They're funny. They're intellectually really funny. I personally feel they could bring their work to a higher level if they figured out their blocking, and that they just weren't moving like this nervous energy back and forth, pacing across the stage. It's something I see as a common habit. What am I to say? You know, I don't make, $6 billion being a stand-up comic, but it's just an observation that you see Ellen DeGeneres, who has worked her stage, and she has figured out her blocking, and she has rehearsed her blocking so much so that she's embodied it, and it becomes like breathing. It becomes second nature, and it looks and feels natural.
Thank you for bringing that up. And so for anybody that's listening and watching this episode, if you haven't seen the Ellen DeGeneres stand-up on Netflix, which I have seen, I know exactly what you're talking about. I also know, as a huge fan of stand-up comedians, I know exactly what you're talking about with some of these comedians that do a lot of pacing. And they may say, well, that's part of their act. However, when you do watch somebody that is as flawless as Ellen is, it's akin to watching a high-level professional athlete.
Yes.
They make it look effortless. So you've got people going, oh, I could go out and shoot the basketball like Steph Curry. Okay. In a game of that magnitude, let's see you do that. And that's a whole different story. So what people don't see are the thousands of hours of practice that goes into it. And the other thing, and I say this to every single heart-centered, conscious-minded entrepreneur watching this and listening to this episode, what Debra said about investing in yourself, about having a Yoda, technically speaking, you really need multiple Yodas, but
Yeah.
so,
I've had multiple Yodas.
Exactly. We all should have them.
We're talking about here right now.
And that's where Debra comes in. So if you need somebody who understands what it takes to get in front of an audience and to convey your message in front of a camera, and let's face it, we all don't need to be on a TED Talk. And a lot of us in today's world, we can reach more people sitting on our desk or in front of our phone on a Facebook Live than you could ever reach by just doing public presentations. However, whether you're in front of a camera, in front of a phone, in front of a live audience, there are very fundamental techniques that are essential to aligning your message with the heart and soul of your audience. And Debra, thank you for being who you are in this world. Thank you for being such a heart-centered teacher, because you are really teaching the concepts of unity consciousness. You're teaching inclusion. You're teaching how to empower people through story. So people who are watching this, you obviously can already see where you can reach Debra, because that information is right there underneath her image. For those of you who are listening to this as an MP3, Debra, share with everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Facebook. It's Debra Lee Crosby. And on LinkedIn, it's Debra Crosby. And you can't miss me because I have blue hair. And my company is called Present to Prosper. Present is a play on words. Present as in presenting, present as a gift, and present as being in the moment. When we give the best of who we are, it's a gift. And that's why I called my studio Present to Prosper. When you are giving your best, you do open yourself to abundance and prosperity. It just go hand in hand. So that's the way to find me right now on Facebook and on LinkedIn. And Peter, I'm going to put this out there. It's my goal now. This is 219. I have a goal to get 10 people on the TED stage. And my ideal client are authors, coaches, and experts who may have experience with speaking, but have this passion to get on the TED stage and see the value of being on the TED stage. They're highly motivated and they're driven. They have a message. They have an idea. They have a story. Maybe they're starting a movement, and they definitely see getting on the TED stage as the platform that they want to get out there. Or they get the value of speaking as if they are a TED speaker to get their message across. And I'll give you a quick example. I had someone who was the president of a Rotary Club here in this area that I do see people through video conferencing, and some people see me locally. And he was the president of his local Rotary Club, had a major fundraising project to the tunes of millions of dollars for a scholarship fund. And their scholarship fund is innovative. I've never seen anything like this. I'm not going to go into the details. But he did the TED Talk training with me because his goal in terms of leaving his presidency was to leave a legacy of love behind, and that the scholarship would be funded magnificently and generously. And he wanted it that it would, his hope was after his talk that he had brought in the most money possible. I went to see him speak, and that night when he was done, someone stood up and handed him a check for $15,000. Someone else stood up in the moment and said, I will double that. And someone else stood up and said, I will match every gift. Wow. 2 days later, I checked in with him. I said, how'd it go, John? He said, we raised more money that night than we have in the entire history of the Rotary Club. Now, that makes my heart sing, Peter, because I know there are kids who are going to get scholarships and have an opportunity to go to school and get further education because of that talk. That's the kind of impact I have. So it doesn't, I love to see people on the TED stage, and I do have a goal of getting 10 people on a TED stage. But if you have goals like that you want to be able to speak in a clear, concise, and compelling manner that inspires people to action where they support your cause, come on board. I'm your Yoda. And I'm going to make a big, bold request of you, Peter. Okay. I want you in my training because I would love to see you on the TED stage. I think your message and how you approach your business is a very fresh and unique perspective. And I think the world needs to hear what you have to say. So we should talk, because you should become one of my clients, because I would love to see you on the TED stage.
Well, thank you very much for that beautiful reflection and for hearing and feeling the message that I'm here to share. And I agree with you 100%. We definitely will be talking. And I do agree with you that the TED Talk platform is, well, it's a critical platform for somebody such as myself, but it's also incredibly important for so many people out there who have a gift to share. And as you just beautifully shared with the experience of the gentleman who worked with you, delivered a presentation, that is an example that delivering effective presentations that align, where the message aligns with the heart and soul of your audience, it pays, literally and figuratively. So, Debra, thank you for being on this podcast episode and sharing your gift and for illuminating the way for others to share their gift with the world. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in and be a part of the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. And if you're wondering whether or not you have an inspired message to share with the world, the fact that you're even wondering that, or that you're watching or listening to this program, means that you do. So unleash your inspired voice, because the world needs to hear and feel what you have to share now more than ever. From my inspired voice to yours, thank you for being a part of this episode, and I look forward to having you join us on the next episode of Unleash Your Inspired Voice. I want to thank our guest for today, Debra Crosby, for joining us on the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. What an incredibly inspiring interview. Since the recording of this episode, Debra has not only become one of the guest mentors for my 10-week group immersive program, The Activation, but I enthusiastically accepted her invitation to work on my own TED Talk program. As those who journeyed with me through the beta launch of the Activation Group program can attest to, Debra transforms people's lives by helping you tap into the essence of your inspired message and becoming a master storyteller. Whether you want to get on the TED Talk stage or simply become more confident in how you communicate your inspired message, Debra is your Yoda for becoming a master storyteller and an engaging presenter. You can connect with Debra on Facebook at facebook.com/Debra Lee Crosby. To get access to bonus material from previous guests and episodes of the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast, as well as being notified of upcoming guests and special events, please be sure to visit unleashyourinspiredvoice.com and sign up today. I also want to give a shout out and offer my eternal gratitude for the divinely gifted team here at the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast. Talassa Tam of Talassa Designs, who is the amazingly gifted artist behind the branding of Unleash Your Inspired Voice. To learn more about how she can bring your vision to life through beautiful and heart-centered brand design, please visit talassadesigns.com. And to my dear friend and brilliant podcast producer, Samantha Castro of Castro Creations, thank you for all you do. Without you, the Unleash Your Inspired Voice podcast would not exist as it does today. If you're seeking high-level editing, mixing, production, and support on your videos or your podcast, please be sure to visit scastrocreations.com. As always, thank you all for joining us on Unleash Your Inspired Voice and for playing an important part in giving birth to unity consciousness in our lifetime.